If you think a Proton X70 or a Honda CR-V might be a bit too pedestrian, why not a GAC Emkoo? Now, the GAC Emkoo is available in Malaysia as the Premium and Premium Pro, with prices rising to about 130,000 ringgit for the Premium Pro that we have here, and it's just about 120,000+ ringgit for the Premium. Regardless of which variant you go for, however, powers remain exactly the same, because under the bonnet you get a 1.5-litre turbocharged 4-cylinder petrol engine producing 177 PS and 270 Newton meters of torque, with the power going to the front wheels via a 7-speed dual-clutch automatic gearbox. If that powertrain seems a bit familiar, it's because it is shared with the GAC Emzoom, the B-segment crossover that's a little bit smaller than this that we already tested. The other thing that this car shares with the Emzoom is its very out there design. Now, GAC calls this the Mecha design, or Mecha face, or something to that effect. And that's M-E-C-H-A, not M-E-C-C-A, which is why the front end of this car looks as angular as it is. You get these large, very wide LED daytime running lights, replete with automatic high beam, as well as the daytime running light signature, which looks, again, very unique to this car. You're not going to be mistaking this for anything else. On top of that, you get this full-width grille, or pseudo full-width grille, which stretches from one end to the other and creates this very angular V-shaped face crested by the GAC logo up here. You get some contrast paneling down below, as well as these sort of inserts here, which remind me of a Proton S70, but for the most part you can say the GAC Emkoo again looks like nothing else out there, and that is partly the point. C-segment SUVs are now starting to look very similar to each other, which is why having something that looks this distinctive at the very least could be a make or break at the showroom. Now, the GAC Emkoo is actually a significantly larger vehicle compared to the Proton X70. Aside from height, this car is both longer and wider than Proton's C-segment SUV, which means that this car does take up quite a lot of room on the road, and more importantly, it offers quite a lot of space on the inside. Now, in terms of rolling stock, this car rides on 19-inch alloy wheels, and despite this being a Chinese car, locally assembled that is, it does at least ride on Continental Eco Contact 6 tires, which is exemplary for a vehicle like this. Given our weather in Malaysia, high-quality tires should not be a negotiable area, and I'm glad that Tan Chong and GAC have seen fit to fit high-quality tires to this car. Moving further down the side, as you can see, there are lots of angular plays to this design, lots of straight lines, lots of cuts here and there, as well as these little inserts up here on the rear spoiler, which again help to make this car look very, very distinctive. I love the fact that, for example, this car has a very sharp jut line up here to give the glass house a very unique look to it. Of course, you do get flush door handles, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but overall I do think the design of the GAC Emkoo looks pretty handsome for what it is. On top of that, given the price point, you're not really paying that much money for something that looks this distinctive. But the back end of the GAC Emkoo once again shows its distinctive design flair, because instead of a full-width LED light bar like everybody else, this car instead has these very tall, very shapely full LED taillights, replete with LED indicators here and brake lights up here, as well as a very distinctive third brake light design there. You also have a relatively high belt line here, which means that again this car looks quite tall, it looks quite chunky, and more importantly on the road it looks very distinctive. Now down here on the bumper, this is a little bit of a hit and miss. You get a lot of contrast paneling here, as well as a little bit more of this silver scuff plate here to make this car look a little bit more SUV off-roadery. But it's these things in the corner that I'm not a big fan of. They look like exhaust exits, but they are not. In fact, they are completely filled in and serve zero function, which means that, again, they're meant to make it look like this car is sporty, but it really isn't. And they work in concert with this fake rear diffuser here, which again sort of goes against the fact this car has so much contrast black paneling. Like, do you want to be a sports car or an SUV? Whatever. Now behind this tailgate, which thankfully is powered if I can find the button, you will find a pretty good amount of space, as to be expected from a C-segment SUV. In terms of literage, this car is very similar to what you get from other segment bests, although notably it is slightly bigger than what you get on a Pro-Door Traz. But overall, I think the space is quite functional. More importantly, you can get this aftermarket, as in it's offered by GAC, load liner, which is always nice to see because it is rubberized, which means that anything you put back here isn't going to slide around, making this car decently practical. Now, the thing about the Emkoo that I would like to point out from here is that there are a lot of Easter eggs around the design of this car. So for example, once you open the tailgate, you will find that there are these panels here that say Emkoo with a little bit of distinctive design, which I think is an interesting attention to detail. But what might be even more easy to miss is the fact that there's a little GAC logo in here, in the indicators. Now, there's no need for that. That is added complication in terms of manufacturing. It would have been cheaper if it wasn't there. But GAC seems to like this sort of thing, this little attention to detail, this slightly more fun side of its personality, which I think is nice for a Chinese car maker. Most of them don't have a sense of humor, but it seems that GAC does. Now, the inside of the GAC Emkoo is interesting. Now, I say that because the design of this interior is unlike anything you've ever seen before in the automotive industry, for better or worse. Now, on the one hand, at least some things are decently conventional. So you have a gear selector here, that's nice to see. You've got lots of buttons on the steering wheel, which is also decently adjustable for both reach and rake, which is always nice to see. And this screen, for example, is not so obnoxiously large that it dominates the interior. Instead, it sort of integrates quite nicely, and it does have all the functions that you're looking for, as well as additional functions on either side in order to adjust things like your fan speed as well as your volume, which is nice to see. At least it's there. Now, in addition to this, you also have, again, lots of buttons here on the steering wheel, but you can also use that to manipulate the instrument cluster. Now, the design of this instrument cluster can be changed between this more simple layout to something that's a bit more conventional, just like we saw from the GAC M Zoom as well as the GAC Ion Y Plus. And all of these buttons are decently clicky, and you understand their operation quite easily. It's quite intuitive in that sense. And this is, of course, supported by a full color heads-up display, which gives you all of the pertinent information that you need, including things like your ADAS functionality. So it's nice to see, for example, you get blind spot monitoring right in your line of sight. You don't even have to move your eye toward the side mirrors to know that there is something there. That's always nice. You also get an electrochromic rearview mirror here, as well as a glass panoramic sunroof, replete with an electric sunblind, which is always nice. You get a wireless phone charger here, a couple of cup holders, as well as an additional sort of smaller side storage here. You get a pretty large center glove box here, large enough for, you know, crap. But more importantly, there is a lot of rubberized material about the place so that whatever that you do put in there isn't going to rattle about. You get space underneath the center console here, where you will find no less than 2 USB-C ports and 1 USB-A port, as well as a decently sized glove box here, although this is not lined in felt, which means that anything that you put in there might rattle about, especially if you're driving a little bit more intently. Now, beyond all of this, you also get decently sized door bins, big enough for a 1.5 litre size bottle, but it is the details in this car that, like I said, are a little bit hit or miss. So, for example, you get these nice sort of metal speaker grills here for the DTS audio system. That's nice. You also get this sort of textured black plastic here for the center console, which is also nice because at least it doesn't look like piano black and it should wear a little bit harder. You also get soft touch material down here and lots of these textured materials about the place, like here and even on this side. However, when you start looking at the materials themselves, that's where things start to get a little bit odd. So, for example, if you want to adjust your temperature, you can do that in the screen. That's pretty easy enough. But there is also a physical control here. Now, this allows you to adjust the temperature up or down, but I'm not sure if you can hear this, but the operation of this switch is not very nice. You also get these flip-up type door handles for the doors themselves, which are, again, not all that nice, and it just doesn't seem to be in keeping with the rest of this car's interior. Everything else seems to feel quite high quality, but this and this doesn't feel very nice. The same goes for the indicator stalks themselves, which the operation and movement are fine, but when you look at the stalks, they just look a little bit cheap. And then you have this little extra bit on this side, on the right side of the instrument cluster, which looks just like this, but it doesn't do anything. So heaven forbid you try to twist this and you realize that the entire panel flexes with the movement of this item, which is just not great. But if you don't touch stuff like that and you sort of just look at the car quite reasonably, everything does seem quite easy. For example, this user interface is relatively simple to use. It is decently thoughtful in terms of its operation, which means that you don't really have to look that far in order to find the operations that you want, although for whatever reason it will not sustain my Android Auto via a USB connection. It'll just sort of keep switching off, and then it'll try to pair to Bluetooth, which it will not work for whatever reason. Either my phone doesn't like this head unit, or this head unit doesn't like my phone. Whatever. Now, beyond that, of course, you do also get a 360-degree camera, which is somewhere in here under AVM, I think, or parking image. And the quality of this is pretty much all right. As you can see, it renders the image quite quickly as a result of a decently powerful processor. I say decent, but okay. And you do get a bunch of wide angle views for you to choose from, which do make parking this car quite easy. Although in addition to all of this, you also get this car's or GAC's proprietary smart parking system, which is among one of the easiest systems to use in terms of automated parking assist. Although honestly, you're not really going to use that because it's a relatively small C-segment SUV anyway. So the two front seats are powered, which is nice to see, at least in this Premium Plus model, and they are also ventilated, which means that you can get decently comfortable in this and you can be prepared to do a relatively long distance journey because the driver's seat also comes with lumbar support. In addition to this, this is one of very, very few Chinese cars that offer under thigh adjustment, by which I mean the seat base is not just adjustable for height but also adjustable for angle, which means that I can actually get into a very comfortable driving position here with very good under thigh support, which means that sat here I can take in a very long distance journey without any issues whatsoever. And because this car has lots of physical controls, I do know that if I intend to take in that long distance journey, I'm not going to be left looking or hunting for different functions and features because everything should fall very easily to hand and it should be relatively straightforward to manipulate. Now, beyond all of this being a C-segment SUV, naturally rear seat space is of great concern to buyers of a car like this. Now, in the back of the GAC Emzoom, life is pretty good. With the front seat set up in my driving position, about 170 centimeters, I have about that much knee room and about that much headroom despite this car's standard fit panoramic sunroof with its electric sun blind, which means that space back here is pretty good. On top of that, the floor in this car is completely flat, which means that even if you put a third passenger here, which shouldn't be so bad because there is a decent amount of room, they should be quite comfortable. Although these outer seats are quite scalloped, I have very good under thigh support and I can tuck my feet in underneath the seat in front of me should there be a taller driver or should there be a taller passenger sat back here. Material quality is okay, where all of this is nice and soft touch and decently high quality, but up here is still soft touch but not as soft as it is in the front. And of course you've lost those nice speaker grills, instead it's just sort of plastic, but overall it's still pretty much okay. You still get ambient light back here like you do in the front, and again everything feels decently positive. Now, in terms of practicality, there is a pretty decent amount of space. There are pockets behind the front seats, decently sized door bins, big enough for a half-litre sized bottle, a single USB-A port in the center console, just below the central crotch coolers. You get a deployable center armrest here with a couple of cup holders, and this feels nice and sturdy, unlike a lot of other cars that you get from within this price point. And you do get ISOFIX mounts that are pretty easy to locate. Now, in terms of fitting a child seat back here, it is a little bit of a mixed bag because the ISOFIX mounts are decently easy to locate, that's fine. But these doors are not particularly large and they don't open very wide, which means that a bulky rear-facing child seat might be a bit of a challenge to fit back here. But once you get them through the door aperture, at least, there is plenty of space, which means that even, again, a bulky child seat shouldn't be fighting for space with the backs of the front seats. More importantly, if you do put children back here, you will appreciate the fact the window line in this car is not that high, which means that they should at least have a good view out of the side windows as well as out of the front, and of course from that panoramic sunroof that I mentioned earlier. All of this feeds to a decently positive interior experience, and all of that positivity actually extends to the way this car drives. Now, the thing about the GAC Emkoo, much like what we discovered about the GAC Emzoom, is that this car is actually pretty decent to drive. The ride in this car is not as floaty as you might expect from a Chinese car maker, which means that sat here, I actually have a decent amount of feedback through my backside. The steering wheel is numb, but it is at least weighted in a very natural sort of way, which means that when you drive this car along, especially at motorway speeds, it's alright, you know, like, it's okay. Now, the secondary ride on this car is not so great. So, for example, when you do hit potholes and so on, in order to give this car the body control that it needs, or that we at least appreciate about the Emkoo, it does mean that when you do hit potholes and stuff, it does sort of reverberate around the car a little bit, but I wouldn't call it uncomfortable. In fact, nothing about this car feels uncomfortable. It just feels really well judged, which means that again, when you're driving along like this, it feels like a perfectly adequate partner for day-to-day drivability. It is just slightly unfortunate that unlike the Emzoom, this car does not come with that active exhaust flap thing. I just really like that in the other car. Now, the other thing that might surprise about this car is the refinement. Simply because in terms of wind noise, this car is very, very, very well managed. It's not until you hit about 130 plus, I'm told, that wind noise starts to become a problem. However, despite the fact this car runs on decently high quality Continental tires, it seems that even on pretty decent surfaces like the Sprint Highway that we're on now, by the time you hit about 90 kilometers an hour, the tires make themselves very, very, very known. And as a result, it does mean that when you are driving along, if you're trying to do or cover meaningful distance, like say a long distance trip, for example, the amount of road noise that gets into the cabin could make you a little bit weary after a couple of hours. So that is something worth paying attention to and something that you might want to address if you are considering buying a GAC Emkoo. However, one thing that you won't need to address is actually this car's powertrain, because at initial sort of throttle input, you might accuse this car of being a little bit lazy, but then again, most DCTs are designed to be this way. They respond a little bit slower in order to prioritize fuel economy as well as overall sort of drivability, the smoothness of operation. But once you do put your foot down and the gearbox figures out what it wants to do, then the car does pick up and go quite urgently. The 270 odd Newton meters of torque that this car seems to offer might not suggest it, but actually it is a pretty decent amount of torque, a decent amount of twist in order to get this car going. And the funny thing is, when you do put your foot down, the engine noise is pretty zesty. And on top of that, there's you don't get a lot in terms of exhaust note, but what you do get is induction noise, which is strange for a C-segment SUV made for families, but well, there it is. It's, again, a little bit of humor from a country that tends to make cars that take themselves incredibly seriously. Now, the other thing that I found quite humorous about this car is the advanced driver assist features, or ADAS functions in this car, because it does work decently well. Like, it doesn't feel like it's overly jerky or jumpy. It feels decently confident in terms of what it has to do and how it executes the different tasks that it has to. And the lane centering in this car is actually not that bad. It is among the better systems that I've tried out of China. However, trying to manipulate the functions of this car's ADAS features will always leave me in stitches, because it seems very clear that GAC has spent a lot of money somewhere, but no money on copywriting. Now, I say this because the English in this infotainment system is shocking once you jump into the settings. For example, this car insists on referring to its headlights and taillights as lanterns, and it does a welcome dance with the weirdest sort of noises and names to it. And I just find it all to be a little bit gimmicky, and more importantly, it doesn't feel polished for export markets. I'm sure this stuff makes perfect sense in Mandarin, and I'm sure that it's very appealing to everybody in China, but in Malaysia, not so much. We like our cars to work as cars. This is not meant to be a jukebox. This is not meant to be a dance floor or a dance club. It's a car. Make it work like a car, please. And that extends to the fact that this car does all sorts of other funny things. For example, when the lights dance when you lock and unlock the car, that's fine. Lots of other cars do it. It's decently tasteful. It's not going to blind somebody in front of you. What I do find very strange is the fact that unless you switch it off, by default, this car will run that same stupid welcome dance animation every time the car comes to a stop. That means at a traffic light, that means at a toll plaza, that means at the boom gate to enter your gated community. That is completely unnecessary and ridiculously attention-grabbing. Why do I need my car to do that? Is it not enough that it's already designed as if it was taken at by an axe already? But at least you can switch it off. And thankfully, when you do switch it off, it stays off. Thank God. But aside from these two decent niggles, I wouldn't call them minor, aside from that, the GAC Emkoo is actually a surprisingly adept car. It drives well, it's very comfortable. The ventilated seats in this car are excellent because my arse is now getting properly frozen. And overall, this feels like a pretty livable package, especially given the fact that the model that we're in now, which is the flagship full bells and whistles model, is only about 130,000 ringgit. And that's before you get the discounts that I'm told that you can get very easily just by lightly torturing your GAC sales advisor. I think that it's time that we stop discounting GAC for being a funny brand with funny product names. Yes, Emkoo and Mzoom aren't great, but then again, GS3 and GS5, I think, aren't particularly memorable either, so at least you remember the fact that they have funny names. But more importantly, beyond the slightly odd naming convention, these are really solid cars. And if you're the type who doesn't like Chinese cars on the basis that they all drive like floaty golf carts, at least this one doesn't. Like, I'm sitting here on an exit, or rather an entry ramp onto the NKVE doing decent speed, and I feel pretty confident. I know what the car is doing. I'm not second guessing its grip nor its ability to keep to the selected line that I have in mind. It just feels like a pretty good companion to take in long journeys or even short ones just to go to the office and back. And then once you do hit the motorway, again, you've got all of that induction noise, just whizzing away in front of you, which is far more characterful than most other Chinese cars, which again just lends to this really interesting character. Now, of course, if you want your C-segment crossover to be a little bit more fuel efficient, or if you'd prefer a slightly more immediate response to the powertrain, for about the same money, you can also get a Chery Tiggo 7 PHEV, which benefits from a fantastical powertrain that will do an average of about 4 liters to the 100 without even trying. And of course, if you plug that car in, then you're talking about 90 kilometers WLTP range on the electric power alone. And of course, if you want a car that's more comfortable perhaps, then there is also the Proton X70 or indeed the Proton E-Mass 7 PHEV, both of which are far more comfortable than this in terms of its ride, because they aim to make it feel like it's floaty as all hell, which means that you do compromise a little bit in terms of driver confidence, but again, it's comfy if you like that sort of thing. In any case, that concludes our review of the 2026 GAC Emkoo Premium Plus. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, hit the little bell icon to notified every time we make a new upload. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. All the links are in the description below, including the link to join our new WhatsApp channel, where you will join about 2,000 members strong. Thank you so much for watching. We'll catch you in the next one. Take care, stay safe, and jangan bodoh.